special days. We haven't had a day like today and yesterday in a long time. So we've got a good day to have this week. We'll start off by a couple of things. The first thing I'd like to do is give you a little bit of an update on my discussion with the county executive on the letter that the county executive had published in the Post Standard. I had a very good conversation. County executive really is focused on the fact that we're in a sweet spot, that there's an opportunity now to really make something happen. And we've got to seize that opportunity. So there's a little bit of impatience to try and do that. I think the other thing is the county executive is very fearful that the city is potentially vulnerable to the imposition of a financial control board. And that really, I think, has created a sense of, let's get this going. And we had an extensive discussion about what some of the options might be and how they might be diminished if the control board actually but I was very clear with her that we all share a need for a balanced approach. We made a commitment to all the constituent groups that anything that we came up with would be supported by analytics, and it's going to take a reasonable period of time to get the data that's necessary to make a grounded decision, some grounded recommendations for a long-haul risk proposition. But I did indicate we would move as quickly as we could, but we could not violate the expectations that we had set for everybody concerned in the process. So the only other thing in that conversation was a commitment to touch base with her at least every other month, so that the county executive knew where we were, knew what some of the things were that we were trying to tackle and that kind of thing, to keep her on board as much as we possibly could. So I view it as a very, very good conversation, and I certainly understand very well her sense that we need to get something done.
Yeah, have we looked at the timing of those two things? And if there's a financial control board and evidence, do we have a sense that we actually have the time to get through this process?
Well, I think if you look at the fund balance that the city has, everybody speaks about potentially every 3 years. Now, is it 2 years or is it 3 years? Certainly, I think if we want to stay on the schedule, we want to have something that the voters can actually vote on in 18 months. That kind of thing we should be able to make.
So your feelings will move in the window.
Absolutely.
Could we ask you to speak up just a little bit too? It's very difficult to hear.
I have a very poor voice.
Okay.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
The other thing we'd like to do is we have a guest speaker. And DeWitt Town Supervisor Ed Nicolenko. I'm going to embarrass Ed a little bit. Ed is both a good friend and a good colleague. He's also very innovative and very much a committed town supervisor. He's deeply engaged in the town of DeWitt, East Syracuse police merger. And I know personally he's committed to do as much for East Syracuse as he is to DeWitt, for the town of DeWitt in this process. And I know he has been somewhat in angst about the process and is very committed to its success. So Ed, it's my pleasure to introduce the town supervisor for the town of DeWitt, Ed Nicolenko.
Thank you. I want to thank Neil. In a past life, I worked at O'Brien here, and I worked under Neil, and I learned so much during those years that's where the roots of our friendship come from. And again, he's been a tremendous mentor, a source of information, and can be a very difficult thing on a budget. And so it was important to the town that the village retain those 207 seats. In terms of deployment, we didn't want to handcuff our police chief, and so the chief has the ability to deploy officers at discretion, but we know from a political standpoint, one of the reasons that the residents of the village are inherently, what's the word? That they are really close to their police officer. A small village setting, and this is one of the difficulties, the larger the jurisdiction, the more problematic it is for your officers to establish a relationship with the residents. So in the case of the village of Syracuse, we're talking an area of only a mile and a half in square territory, low number of individuals per officer, and therefore these people are well known. The residents know the police, and the police know the residents. And so you can't get a better community policing relationship. And so in order to make this work, the town is committed to maintain those 5 full-time officers in that post. Are assigned to the post in the village. Should the town not be able to provide the service, it's not committed on a 24-hour set, assuming there is an emergency or some type of situation within the village or outside of the village that causes those officers to be pulled from the village for an extended period of time, then the town will make whole those costs of personnel assignment back to the village. So the services contract would not be in effect for those situations. So on things like substations, transfers of equipment, automobiles, all that stuff went through negotiations, and there was basically a deal arranged between the village and the town. For example, police cars, any of the cars currently in use in the village will be absorbed into the town's fleet at the end of the contract. Okay, the compensation of the contract, and again, the devil was always in the details, but what the town was adamant about, my position up front was that we wouldn't impose any kind of tax increase on town residents outside the village. So the number was derived by taking the difference, or the delta between the revenues generated in the town through the increase of assessment in the village. Currently, let me back up a little bit. Currently, all of the village's residents do not pay for town of DeWitt police. We have what's called a general town budget and a part-town budget. The village, because they have their own police force, cover their own police. Our police department is covered in what's called the part-town budget. So there would be a shift from the part-town budget to the general town budget, of which the entire town of DeWitt is currently supported. So one of the reasons for the enhanced services agreement is to avoid that increase, I call it that shock, in terms of increased cost of policing the village. And so the number that was derived was the village of East Syracuse would pay us $375,000 for 4 years, starting again in 2015 and carrying through 2018. Payments would be made on a quarterly basis, and they would be made up front. What that does for us is it gives us a 4-year period to adjust our policing levels. It allows the village residents to be comfortable with the town of DeWitt. We all recognize this services agreement is not going to last. I'm very upfront with residents of the village and anyone else, but the village is not going to renew this contract. This is a 4-year transitional contract by which the residents of the village of East Syracuse, because one of the #1 concerns we've heard is that they don't want the town of DeWitt. There's a mentality in the village, and I believe it's associated with a very close relationship between police officers and the residents. The average residents in the village of East Syracuse knows the name of their police officer. Venture to say the average resident in the town of DeWitt does not know the name of their police officer. And that's because of the size and the numbers of individuals that we're talking about. And so this 4-year window allows village residents to become comfortable with the town of DeWitt police car responding to their needs and public safety concerns. But also, most of the officers in the village of East Syracuse are 15, 16 years plus. On average, most officers retire in a 20-year window. So the 4-year contract gives us the time to change over the current officers that the village residents are familiar with officers that at the end of this contract life won't be the same composition that it is today. The benefits to the town were that there's no tax increase outside of the town. And I liken this to the sales tax issue. But we were one of the few towns, and every town had a different set of circumstances, so it's not apples and apples. But we were one of the few towns that were able to lose the sales tax with a minimal impact on our residents. And one of the reasons was that we were able to plan for that. In the 3-year step-down window, we took the money that the county gave us up front, and we held that in essentially a bank account. And we fed that money out slowly into our budget at the end of the 3-year period, so that each year subsequent to the loss of sales tax revenue, we still had a little bit of revenue coming in. And then each year's budget, we made up a little bit more already, so that we stayed within the 2% tax cap to try and backfill the loss of the sales tax revenues. And this contract does a very similar thing to this. It allows us to take the $375,000 for 4 years and put that away, cover the cost, it covers that delta. But in that 4-year window, there's a couple assumptions we gotta have. We gotta have at least a steady growth or hold at a constant level of our assessed valuation. The assessed valuation in the town of DeWitt is not grown rapidly in the last 10 years, and so we've probably fooled ourselves or kid ourselves if we think it's going to increase at a rapid rate in the next 4 or 5 years. But our goal is to maintain a whole steady line on it. It allows us to adjust our staffing levels on the police at the end of this contract. The idea that we can plan our budget. It's like taking, it's a bad analogy, but I'll use it. It's the best I can think of right now. It's like taking a fish from a hatchery at a temperature that is room temperature, thrown it into an environmental stream, you're expecting it to survive at a colder temperature. And so what this does for all of us is really it's a step down. A good fisheries manager takes their fish, takes them out of the field before they drop them in the stream, they bring the temperature down in the water they're holding their fish in, and before they release them. So this 4-year window allows us to adjust from a budget standpoint, from a management standpoint, and also an acclimation standpoint, the two bodies. In essence, the savings is, estimates range between $200 and $300 per $100,000 house. We've been conservative in our approaching the residents and the voters on this, and saying that there's $175 a year benefit to the residents of the village of East Syracuse. But in the long run, it really stems a tide that allows them to stabilize their budget. Right now, they're currently at an assessed rate per thousand of $16.41 per thousand. It's not a high socioeconomic neighborhood of the village of East Syracuse, and so that tax burden is tremendously burdensome to businesses and residents alike. So that would drop to $15.47 if the referendum is passed. So it's a considerable reversal trend. If the referendum does not pass, we say the current rate in the village is $16, but it won't surprise us if under the current conditions that they quickly approach $18. So the savings on paper really don't show the full story, and that is that the cost of maintaining our police department continues to increase, fuel costs and labor costs continue to rise, and 80% of the cost of any governmental office is personnel costs. That's probably a low estimate. There is a the term would be met. So we're hoping that the referendum passes. I would open it at this point in time to any questions that you have about this. I'm sure I provoke thoughts that I didn't address myself.
And what's the major difference between the last time and this time?
The actual shock of the tax increase. Last time that this issue was broached to the village was in the mid 1350 per thousand, and the value of that referendum shot the tax rate up to 16.
That's that's the highest municipal tax rate now.
Yeah, I think this is a great presentation, and one of the things that I wanted to ask the committee members is, you said 207C, and I have 207A, and I know Mark has it. Does everyone know what that is? Because we're talking about another burden on taxpayers that people don't understand. Police and fire, if they get hurt in the line of duty, per New York State law, we have to pay them 100% of their salary. So God forbid we have a line of duty death, and we have it, and we're paying that widow right now his salary until he retires. And I had to hire a new employee. So I have double the pay. Happens with fire, it happens with police. Also, everybody in this group should understand that no police officer in New York State pays into the retirement. That the taxpayers pay 100% of that, police and fire. Okay, so when we talk about these mandates and these burdens, and all of you go, oh, it's villages or it's towns, it's these mandates that we're under pressure to pay, that we have no choice. And Ed and Mark, I budget 207 Ed, I have to. And I budget $60,000 a year for my fire department in case they get hurt. If I don't spend it, I roll it over and hope I don't need it the next year. But every year it seems to happen, where we have to go through it. So I think everybody in this thing needs to understand that the big driver of the budget, and the police department and the fire departments, their benefits and their salaries, probably 75 cents on the dollar, pretty close, 70 cents on the dollar. Think about that. So every dollar they spend, 70 cents goes to labor and benefits. And it's probably true in the sheriff's department. It's a very expensive business to put together to do.
And it's a cost that doesn't go away no matter what the level of government is. One of the reasons the town is able to take on the village policing is we're bigger, and what I keep saying is that somewhere we're going to face these same issues down the road. It's just, unless those issues are solved, pension, benefit issues are state-level costs have to be handled on this state level.
And one of the things that struck me about it, so yeah, the referendum is almost 2-1 against. One of the things that struck me was just the surprisingly small number of people actually voted in that election. I don't know. I think there were what, 800 total votes, 500, 300, or something like that.
About 1,500.
How many registered?
1,500, 3,000 residents. Those are rough numbers.
Is that right? So there was a 50% turnout, which isn't actually pretty good at this age, right?
Well, actually, the 1,500 registered voters is actually a low number as well. There's probably close to 10,000 residents in the village of Syracuse. So it's an area that we all suffer from. I think I know the other next participation. Our town election levels, the number of individuals that are really eligible to vote versus registered, is a huge discrepancy, and then the number that actually participated that is registered is a huge discrepancy. So we struggle engaging our residents on a continual basis.
And I think just from my perspective, I think about what you're going through in the context of this work, though, and it sort of drives home the point to me that there are two parts to the work of this commission, right? There's putting the data and the nuts and bolts together and presenting a case for perhaps something that might be better, and then there's the practical reality of people have to want it, they have to vote for it, they have to choose it, you have to organize around it, you have to be smart about it, and it takes time. You can't just mobilize 2 days before a referendum and expect that people are going to turn out and vote, right? You have to spend a lot of time and energy and resources trying to make the case at every level.
One of the issues, and I did get vetted publicly, and I want to thank Bob Techman, who is the current manager of the village, because we worked very well together. One major issue that we vetted publicly was this date on the referendum. We asked the town to delay the vote and spend more time educating the public or working with them in terms of getting the information out and trying to convince people that this was the right thing to do.
once you came to the conclusion on how you want to go forward with the referendum, how much time do you think you would need to do something like that on your own? And number two, what was your greatest challenge, other than the lack of participation?
Those are extremely powerful questions with very long, complicated answers. But one of the biggest challenges was getting the different parties in the room at the same time. Get the WIT PBA and the village PBA and management teams on both police departments, the political leaders behind the village of East Syracuse, and the town officials. We had our own police commission and everything, getting everyone in the same room at the same time was extremely difficult. So that one party could look at the other and say, this is our issue. Because what we would do is we would meet with one party and we would solve an issue, so we thought, until we ran back around and heard from a different party that was unworkable. And so we continually struggled to get the many different interests on the same page and to compromise. It was very difficult to get someone to say, okay, this is the best agreement in the world from everybody's perspective, but we've all come a little bit into this, and everybody's got a little skin in the game. The other thing was about what time frame we would do that.
Can you just think of just a little while?
Well, the other part of the question was, how much time would you need to do this something similar on a county level? I think you need a considerable period of time, because probably one of the starting points would be to get all the different parties again in the same room to start that process, to get everybody's issues up front, how you have to build that system. I think many folks can come up with the ideas that would lead to, let's say, a metropolitan police force or a metropolitan fire department, but the biggest resistance would come from the individual parties. And so the only way I think you get their buy-in is to let them help lead you through the process. But people have to understand that it's in their best interest to help develop the system. And you can learn from those. The practitioners are the ones that know how they respond and what's the best system to be built. And so as long as those individuals don't feel there's something to be lost on their part, you need at least 2 years. That's a minimum.
And is that one of the big differences from a year ago? If I recall correctly, the village police department was not really on board. And what was the difference in being able to get them on board?
Again, I think they are in tune with the residents of East Syracuse. And I think the tax shock after the last referendum was one of the major drivers. I think they saw the writing on the wall. Even if they were to forestall this referendum. If this referendum goes negatively tomorrow, I think the PBA and the village of East Syracuse realizes their days are numbered. So, again, this has been a 15, 20-year process, and so will it end at the referendum tomorrow? No, I believe it'll just kind of recess and lay low for a while, but the issue will come back to us. It's based on past history, about every 4 or 5 years.
And sort of 2 things in my mind. One, which is I think a useful path forward as we think about diving into each of these areas of service delivery. I think your advice is to engage those stakeholders involved in that throughout the county, throughout the town's municipalities, and have them be a part of those individual conversations. Obviously, we're trying to do that at a macro level with the diverse group around this table, but that I think is a good touch point for us, thinking about how we educate ourselves about them and think about what the solutions are. The second, which I think is useful to keep in mind, which is what you just said, at the end of the day, there's a cost for inaction, right? And I don't know what that costs. So the PDA's numbers are, days are numbered. So what happens in that scenario? Ultimately, I mean, no police force and the county has jurisdiction, or how does that, how does that play out ultimately?
If the village of East Syracuse abolishes its police department outright, or the village of East Syracuse were to fold, this is one of the reasons I'm an advocate of the services agreement, is that the bottom line is the town of DeWitt's still responsible for policing the village. There is a considerable demand for police services in the village of East Syracuse. And so that shock would be more detrimental to the town of DeWitt on a whole rather than a plan to control the transition. So the services agreement is to everyone's benefit. Should the village run into extreme financial problems and collapse, the town of DeWitt not just responsible for policing, but also would be responsible for picking up the debt loads in the village of East Syracuse, or at least those residents would have to maintain. We'd have to somehow put together districts, as the governor talked about today, to carry over the load that currently exists on the books in terms of those. So it's in our best interest to see that the village of East Syracuse, should it decide to dissolve, does so in an organized, controlled manner. Because crisis management, as everyone knows, is not in anybody's best interest. So coming back to the managing units, I'll just use this as an example, and this is hopefully an area that we're going to look at as well. But I have 3 fire districts in the town of DeWitt. One of those fire districts is the volunteer fire department in the village of East Syracuse, and that is our lowest cost fire district. It's one of the anomalies in central New York, but it's still a very strong volunteer fire department. We have 60 to 70 volunteers. So the preservation of that culture as a volunteer is extremely important to us. But I have 2 other fire districts. And the tax rate on those fire districts are higher than our highway departments. So when people complain about their tax bill, one of the things that I always look at is that they're looking at the bill in whole, but we plow their snow every day, pick up their leaves, patch potholes, get their storm drains and stuff for less than their fire district cost. And one of the things is the structure, the way that district is set up. If I had a heart attack at my house, the DeWitt Fire Department would do a wonderful job in responding. They would be there in less than a minute or 2 and respond and attend to my medical needs. Should I need transport downtown, they call rural metro. Rural metro comes with the same 3 level of training, and the emergency medical technician would show up, and then I would be transported downtown to the hospital, and that would come out of my insurance bill. So there has to be a better system in my mind where the responders that show up in the first place have the ability to take me downtown and also bill my insurance to offset the cost. There's currently 3 people that showed up at the fire department that are EMTs show up on my tax bill, and Rural Metro shows up, and they show up, and they come out of my insurance bill. And so we're paying twice for the same responders. That's a system that we want to look at all the time.
Rob, just to follow up on that real quick, the other thing we know will happen is that one of the reasons why the village tax rate is going to increase definitely is because their village-wide valuations decreased fairly substantially between 2012. It's one of the things when Bob Antonacci was he said, well, why is the savings so much different? We went through it, and the valuation decreased. And what that's saying is that this increase in tax rate is directly associated with the decrease in overall valuation because people can't pay their bills, because people move out of town, because they can't attract businesses, increasing people trying to offset some just general decreases in valuation. So I would say that one of the things you can count on definitely if this doesn't pass is that there will be continuing erosion of that village-wide valuation.
And how about, if at all, were the local state legislators in this government?
They're aware of the issues, and we've kept them informed of it, but the issues like 207A and C, I haven't seen any movement. So one of the issues that we've been banging on with them is the pension system. Pension system costs. And I know there's differences of opinion on some of these issues, but one of the things that we see is that those public employees that have the ability able to pad their pensions in the system because the rules were set up that way. And a police officer, for example, seeing we're talking about police, at the end of his tenure in a 20-year window, he's able to almost double his salaries by picking up the overtime. Now, in a normal workplace, seniority usually brings the worker to a state where they have a little more benefit. So those are the types of individuals that aren't going to want to work on a holiday. They're going to use their seniority to get them. And so it's your younger, lower paid individuals that are usually picking up your overtime. But because of the way the state pension system is set up, we pay an awful lot in police pensions and fire because of the fact that incentive is there for the overtime benefit to go into that formula. And so we advocate we pull the overtime benefit from the formula. I think that's a pretty simple enactment on the part of Albany that would have very tangible relief at the municipal level. School district, for example, teachers aren't picking up overtime salaries. And so they're not doing, they're not incorporating that into the formula. And so most public employees, all our white collar workers that are in town hall, go to the clerk's office, that individual doesn't have the option of doubling their pay towards the end of their tenure in the municipal job because they're not given that opportunity for that overtime.
And quick question, when you think about public engagement, and as we step through this process, what do you believe are the best ways or the best thinking or practices around public engagement?
The more the better. And you have to have patience. I really believe that these meetings can break down the tedious, oftentimes here, a tremendous amount of redundancy. Oftentimes there's an element that shows up at these public meetings that the normal person doesn't want to spend time or energy even allowing that level of discussion because it's counterproductive. You have to give people time to vent within reason. And I've been in a number of meetings where I essentially pulled the plug on an individual, but you have to weather that. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons that these things don't go forward is that there's always some apprehension as to whether or not this can become violent or there's a potential for severe harm. And yet we live in a democratic society where the public has the right to come in and tell you what that you should do or direction you should take. And so you have to listen to them.
I think we have to move on. I think this is a good transition as we talk about public engagement. Please stay with us if you have the time. You show your wisdom.
I don't know if it's wisdom.
No, we've had a very spirited committee meeting. We've got some findings that you want to share with us.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Neil. We did. We had a very spirited, engaging, and as well as thoughtful meeting where we really began to shape and think about what public engagement, what does it look like? And Ed, glad to hear some of your sentiments around creating a platform for very spirited discussion and conversation, because that was very much what we discussed. So a couple of things, and all of the commission members who were present at the meeting, please feel free to jump in as well. But let me paint a little bit of a picture for you. The staff came in, talked to us really about the phased approach of public engagement, and really that it may be three components, and we'll review those in a second, and what those three components were. And the team did add a fourth component, but we'll talk about that in a second. One of the other critical elements that came out of our discussion was the need for the entire commission to be conversant and very comfortable with the role of the commission, what it is that we are charged to do, and how might we best exercise our roles and responsibilities as a commission. And really, again, how we use our roles as a connection point for public engagement. We talked about as well, again, the frequency and being very deliberate about going out and engaging all different levels of stakeholders. And a big part of what we discussed putting together, and all of you will receive following the meeting, is a list of organizations, entities that we began having this dialogue that we needed to engage in discussion, and the list is voluminous. The subcommittee did look and really began weighing in on those names, so you will as well be given that opportunity, and I believe it's also included in your packets today, but it'll be sent to you electronically for you to have a little bit more time and spend some time with the list, add names. Again, our objective is how do we create the engaging dialogue on a consistent basis and hitting all elements of stakeholders. We also talked about the notion of a potential list of expert speakers on government modernization, and really those entities that have had some success, and then those that may not have, and what are the lessons that we can learn, because a big part of what our discussion is around is how do we look at best practices, and how do we look at how we might be able to learn and benefit from other areas of what other municipalities did. So the phases, there are four of them, as I mentioned. The first we saw as the public education phase, the explaining the who, what, where, who are we, what are we charged to do. And then we saw the second phase as the public engagement phase, and that would probably be one of the most extensive phases of the public engagement campaign. And that is that whole active dialogue, that soliciting input, that listening that we need to do. And really just trying to drive input from all of those entities. And certainly we believe this will be the most robust part of the process. Phase 3, the public feedback and the findings, because the worst thing that we said as a team is we can't solicit feedback if we don't want to do anything with it. So solicit feedback, but then take that information following how the consultant is engaged, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, and what are we going to do with the findings and your recommendations? We need to go back out and share how we incorporated the feedback, dialogue, and discussions of the public engagement component. And then fourth, and this was the fourth piece that the team felt very strong about, was the post process. So we've gone through steps 1 through 3. The post process, a year later, how did we do? Did we hit the mark? Did we achieve what we thought we could? And how do we re-engage the public in a post-process review? And so that was the fourth phase. Other discussion points that are worth noting just in terms of ways in which people engage is the website, and really how to develop and build out the website. And social media, of course, it's always an interesting way in which people engage, but as I'm sitting here now, my Twitter is going off about now, but that's the way people engage. So how do we use it, and how do we use it effectively, and how do we manage it? And then wrapped around all of that is the budget framework, and really there's a cost to do this work. And there's a cost for public engagement, and how might we think about what those numbers are. So committee, did I leave anything out other than leave out that number? I don't know, I'm special. Anything, all right, good, that's my report.
Questions or no?
So is your thinking then that you would provide talking points to the consensus commission so that you have that opportunity to be in the public or engage that way?
Yeah, we actually talked about two things. One, having a deeper, I would hate to call it training, but a little bit more of a deeper dive into all of the elements that we need to know and be conversant in. And then certainly giving you, if you will, an elevator speech, just so that you can have at least the high points of, you know, there will be times that folks stop you either, you know, out at an event, grocery store, or wherever. You need to know those salient points in which to engage, you know, because every opportunity, we need to use it as a public engagement opportunity. So we would not be doing our job of being fully prepared, this body, to be those, you know, frontline engagement folks, because we're all going to be asked the question.
Other questions? Kim, what does this sound like to you? Are we on the right track? Yeah, absolutely. Good. The next major committee meeting that we held was actually a committee meeting to review specifically the responses to the RFP. Rob, let us through that. Rob, you bring us up.
Sure. So as you know, we had the RFP out for bid for 30 days. The RFP was distributed broadly, not only to a group of 45 or so stakeholders that we had a list of, but also posted a number of locations to make it pretty widely available. Despite that outreach, we were surprised when only 3 responses came back in the door. We did get some feedback from a couple of stakeholders who chose not to respond, including some of the larger national consulting firms that Darlene had encouraged us to reach out to, all of whom expressed a tremendous amount of interest in the project, who I think would look forward to potentially working with us, but I think the uncertainties around the sort of long-term continuation of the work, given that we only have funding for what we know is one phase, really led some of those stakeholders to sit on the sidelines as opposed to respond. Disappointing, I think, although of the 3 responses we received, I think there were 2 that were certainly fair, credible, and worth further evaluation. There was 1 response that came in that was deemed non-responsive by the RFP review committee, and candidly not worth your time to spend a minute looking at it. But what we have decided to do is to do in-person interviews with the 2 finalists, one of whom is the Center for Governmental Research, familiar to all of you, based out of Rochester. The other is a group led by Peter Fairweather, a Fairweather consultant. And those 2 interviews will be held, what's the date? The 24th?
3 to 5.
3 to 5, so there'll be 2 back-to-back interviews, 45 minutes to an hour piece. Anyone is invited to participate in those interviews. And we'd also welcome your feedback. Everyone should have received a copy of those RFPs in your packets. If you can't attend, but would just like to provide us your written comments, we welcome that. I think if I just summarize the observations of people around the table during that discussion, first and foremost, both consultants have crossed the credibility threshold. I think both could conceivably work with us and help us accomplish what it is we're trying to accomplish. Each brings separate strengths. There was a pretty large discrepancy in price between the 2 consultants. One came in about 180.
181,
and the other at 90 or so. And I think my perspective on that is probably both consultants didn't fully understand what it is that we're asking them to do. And so our desire during that face-to-face interview with both consultants is not just to ask people about how they would do their work, but also to better communicate what it is we're trying to accomplish. One of the consultants responded with a litany of sort of consolidation studies they've been involved in, and we want to emphasize that that is, that is not the sole purpose or objective of this work, but that it's more broad. Also, I think that the consultant responded with a $90,000 budget doesn't really understand the full scope of services that you need or the duration that you need those services for. And their budget estimate is probably, I guess, correspondingly low as a result of that. So we want to spend some time face to face, get a better understanding of exactly where they're coming from, make sure there's a comfort level with them. But at this point, I feel pretty confident that coming out of those interviews that you will have at least one, if not two, great choices to select. I think we talked about with the RFP committee, trying to empower that committee during the course of those 2-hour interviews and discussions thereafter to make a decision so that we might begin negotiations and hire that consultant before this group meets again. Given the fact that we don't yet have a full time schedule stretching out the next several months for these meetings, we don't want to be in a situation where we have to wait another 4, 6, 8 weeks to get full approval of everyone on the table to start gathering data. So we'd like to talk about and get your feedback on how we might make that decision, whether it be electronically, a sort of decision memo coming from the RFP review committee. It's circulated to folks that you could just weigh in on electronically and allow us to get started. So happy to answer any questions. A number of the folks who are in the room for that discussion here can also chime in if I miss something.
Sensitive to the county executive's concern about time, we want to try and get this up by May 4, select the consultant by May 1, and then very shortly after that, get the contract for the negotiation and get them on board.
If choices, it should be that hard to get to one. Just of the RP committee, do you have, for the purposes of this discussion with the respondent, do you have a set of principles or values that you want them to address, each one address the same issues and same questions in that process?
I think it's somewhat difficult because, frankly, each of them both addressed and didn't address the scope of work in the different areas. But I think there are some basic things like how come you didn't address this in your response to the proposed scope of work. There'll be about 5 or 6 basic things.
We have maybe some open-ended questions that they would have to respond to a scenario.
Why don't we try and get that out to people? Because I think there are half a dozen basic things. Who is going to be the person on the ground that's going to deliver the work? If you have 6 or 8 residents, who's that person, the primary contact? Who's going to do the work? So there's some basic things like that we need to get out of it.
And one of the consultants, if I recall, only had 4 or 5 visits to the region during the course of the study period, which is simply not going to meet our needs or the community's needs to be visible and transparent and be seen. So the way I would act on your suggestion, which I think is a good one, is that we put a 1 or 2 page sort of summary together of some of the key questions we have that are both that we have for both consultants, as well as some of the unique questions that we may have for each of the individuals. This is where we can take your questions if you have them and send them to us, and we can incorporate them into those documents. We can get them to the consultants ahead of time so that we can make the best use of that hour interview that we have with them. And I also like what you said about a statement of values, just in terms of being very clear and direct about the values that this group, those of us around this table, want to be reflected in any proposal and action on behalf of the consultant, like transparency and all the rest of it. I think that's a good idea. We haven't done that.
I read both of them, and I thought they both did a very good job. But my question was, why the difference in cost? One is almost double the other. But I also thought the one that actually was the more expensive one did a very thorough job in the presentation. It almost appeared as though they actually had a grasp of what our mission is and what we're expecting them to deliver. And they almost delivered it in their presentation. It is very impressive to go through this and to see the step-by-step which they went through. So for, I think we should follow up to see if the other can deliver the same way and they understand. But I was very impressed with the presentation.
And I think that's
Actually, what
CGR proposal is the one
Yes,
question.
yes. What impressed me with that is also they went to the next phase. They really almost wanted to guide us into the positive aspect of the study we reached.
So one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about as we were going through these, and I think sort of a moment of realization for all of us, we probably knew it beforehand, but we maybe hadn't admitted it to ourselves, is that I don't care whether it's Accenture, CGR, or a smaller shop like your Fairweather Group, they bring a core set of capabilities to help us on the data and analysis side, but there really are not many firms, consulting firms, that have successfully led through the implementation phase on a project of this scale, because there just aren't examples, right? For the very things we've been talking about, a lot of people haven't been able to bite this off and make it work. And so expecting that skill set in a consultant sort of canned, and here's a list of the 4 places we've done this, is, I think we might have hoped for that, but having seen the responses and talked to them, I don't think that we have to reframe our expectations. And I also think that probably means that a significant portion of that work, we're going to have to reevaluate and revision after we do get the data and we see where it points us. We may need a different consultant to help us with that. We may be able to build on what someone's already given us. We may have to do some of that work ourselves. But there's nobody out there who's gone and done this in 10 communities and is the best in the country at it. There's not.
At what point do we, I know this CGR had helped Princeton, and they've been at it for a little while, not too long ago. At what point do we envision calling Princeton and seeing what the experience has been? Because I would imagine we would want to do that before the engage.
We did talk about a follow-up with some of the communities that both consulting firms and provided services. And I think that's what's
I'm especially interested in seeing areas outside New York State.
So Princeton, Louisville, Indianapolis, there are a couple others that are on our list. The staff has created sort of a list of other places that you might want to learn from, bring a speaker in from those areas that went through that. And Princeton is one of them.
And I think also we agreed at the RFP committee after the 24th when the consultants make their presentation in person, several members of the committee are going to follow up with references on both proposals as an obvious way of getting additional feedback in terms of on-the-ground experience.
I guess one question that I have, just specifically following up on what you're asking me, is whether or not we ought to be trying to bring those external stakeholders in to meet with us, or whether or not we ought to be bringing them in to meet with the community or some combination thereof. You know, I started thinking about whether or not there might be value in running a sort of parallel path to everything else we're doing in a speaker series that would be open to the public, available, higher profile speakers to come in and just raise the level of awareness and dialogue about what it is that this commission is doing and what we're trying to accomplish. It's similar to what's going on with 81, actually, I'm thinking about.
I think that was a recommendation.
Yeah, that was one of the core recommendations, and so I think we can use the opportunity to do both. One, use it as an opportunity to review related references, but also use it as a learning opportunity. All that.
I think there's nothing more credible or reaffirming than somebody who's been through the same process, and they can witness.
Just like you.
Yeah. They can witness to the success and to the shortcomings.
You know, based on the respondents, the number of respondents, in fact, that we get McKinsey, Accenture, and so on, it's money matters. And I wonder if in this process of picking one and working with that one, whatever the result of that is at the end, if that's something that we can then market, not necessarily, well, market to our funders, have some hook in there, or two or three, that would appeal to state government, federal government, Rockefeller, whoever, that we could then go for the next level. Because as you said, we may need another consultant to get us to that implementation stage. We talked about the different phases of this. We may need more than a consultant.
So just to bring everyone up to speed, we did, Center State make one of our budgetary priorities in trying to work through the development budget process this year was to secure some additional funding for this work. I'm sorry to admit that we were not successful in doing that. That said, subsequent to finding out that we weren't able to get another $250,000 for the second phase of this work, we have reached out, we've sent letters of inquiry to 5 of the major national foundations who expressed some level of interest in this work. And those are all pending, that we'll be following up, staff will be following up in the next couple of weeks. But I think that I may, and I might like to enlist the support of 1 or 2 others on this committee that have either an aptitude for or an interest in helping on the fundraising side. It would be great to have 1 or 2 other people who are helping on that, folks who could do some outreach, to make some phone calls, talk to some stakeholders. It would be great to have a partner or 2. So we're willing to take that on our shoulders at the staff level, but it'd be nice to have 1 or 2 people who can help as well.
Can I ask a question? In that proposal from CGR, they talk about this newly established New York State Financial Restructuring Board for local government. How much dovetail do you have with that? Is there a formal relationship between us and them, or should there be?
There is no formal relationship between them. We could circulate to you a list of who that financial restructuring board is. Those members have been named at this point, I believe.
What's the scope of that?
You have to be a municipality, is my understanding of the legislation, in order to qualify for consideration of the restructuring and the corrective. I think that still holds true. And I believe that the intent of the legislation was to allow a municipality who felt fiscal stress to partner with this restructuring board who would say, let us help take a second look at your fiscal stresses. Let us help provide some expertise in terms of a plan. And we will potentially assist you financially in bridging, as Ed calls it, the delta to your plan. However, you have to agree to do it all. You know, once we say, here's the delta, here's the plan, we're all in. There's no parts or pieces. So us, don't qualify as a recipient at the moment of any potential funding there. Although I would not, long term, I would certainly not be adverse to, once we have data and product and suggestions and our own delta, going and saying, okay, how about if you help out in a new way here? So I don't think that would be viewed unfavorably by the governor and his staff at this point. But I don't think we're ready, obviously, to make that case in any way. But that's my understanding as I read the bill, and if anybody else, I don't, to my knowledge, that hasn't changed. Travis, Andy?
I only know one of the municipalities in our village or the town of Marcellus.
Who entered into it?
Or it's just listed as elder.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's listed as potential elder. So I thought that was a whole lot of place on our call where I call.
Why don't we take that as an action on the bill, is to do a little more homework on that and make sure that we understand it and circulate that information to the commission so that you're empowered with that.
Well, I think the other issue here is that this is so data-driven. I mean, you talk about delta, if you don't have good numbers, you're dead. And if there's resources at the state level that's looking at certain numbers, you certainly wouldn't want to be at odds with what's happening at the state level.
No. I agree with that.
Other questions about the proposals received through the RFP process?
Just want to, they both offered to do a website or collaborate with our website. Is there any potential savings if we run our own, or is it possible to do it?
We're doing using sweat equity. Kevin, you might want to just briefly describe.
Well, Travis met with Mark Stress in the last few days to talk about some of the needs that we identified in our most recent public engagement committee meeting to really bring the website up where we can give them budget that we have to work with, it looks like we will be able to hit all of the functionality that we want, and we will be able to do it likely within 6 weeks or so. I expect that we'll have it up and running fully with the plan to. In the meantime, we have been making some updates to the essentially placeholder site that we did for our rollout. But I believe we are pretty well positioned in terms of having website functionality that's going to be our needs.
There's two components to it to consider. One of which is, we're compiling this data, and we want to present that data in some particular fashion. I think CGR's did a fantastic job describing exactly how that can be. And on the other side, in the meantime, we're going to have a website with information, content, updates, as you see now. And so, how that information is parsed and presented to the public, I think it's more of a data side decision and consultant portion of it, as opposed to a web designer, somebody who's going to come in as a third party and say, what are you trying to say? As opposed to your consultant who's presenting this in a particular way. And we can tie the two together. That's one of the things we're able to work out with our website goals. So I would think about two different components. I would say you want it no matter what, in the data stuff directly with the consultant, because of the decisions you can make. And then the other side of it, sure, we can do it, but it's a relatively nominal amount.
Good, any other questions to pose the line?
I just want to make sure that there's a comfort level around the table with coming out of those interviews, the committee, the 5 or 6 great people that are on it, making a recommendation back to this group electronically, and then getting an electronic endorsement of that, or offering your concerns electronically about that, and using that as a decision-making process. Is everyone comfortable with that? As opposed to a more formal. Great. Thank you.
Excellent. Kathy, you're going to review with us options for scheduled meetings.
I just have a quick, in my never-ending attempt to try to find a date that works for all of us. And everyone laughs because it's really hard. I just quickly, the first Friday or the fourth Friday of every month, I know that we have members who have standing commitments on the second and third Fridays. So I'm just wondering if even for like a 6-month period, we could look at maybe the first or the fourth, kind of lock it in for purposes of like, obviously our next meeting, we would hope that the consultant will be here to speak to all of you at great length, answer questions, et cetera, and sort of begin the consultant process.
What time of day?
We're flexible on time. I mean, I think that there's been back to me, early morning or end of the day, the 4 o'clock window is a better time frame than trying to do something at 11 or 12. For most people, it just, especially, at the end of a work week, trying to leave wherever you are for the middle of the day seems to be tricky at best for most. So I just, off the top of your head tonight, we will continue to do this by email as best we can, but if the first or the fourth Fridays are out for you for any reason, you have a standing something somewhere with another board or your own organization. Yeah.
Just the first Friday in the morning, the afternoons, the late afternoons.
Okay.
Not the first Friday, the rest of them are fine.
Great.
We'll just keep it more.
The early AM.
Well, to like, maybe 2 o'clock in the day.
Yep.
After that, it's fine.
Okay.
And the first Friday, the other Friday, are fine.
Great.
Kathy, are we locked into Fridays?
We're not locked into Fridays, but Fridays on initial reviews seem to be the best majority days, for the majority. And maybe we can take a look at that, backing off into a Thursday or a Monday, but it just, on the initial pass, Fridays seem to be the easiest days for people to have the most flexibility. So I just.
So are people first Friday?
First, anybody?
Yeah, if I'm thinking one, make it first, or as long as it's
As long as it's in the morning, not in the late day.
Fridays.
Nobody wants
I
late
would just
afternoon
offer
Friday.
my own, just for
I know.
running a lot of meetings, late afternoon, about the summer months. And just
Well,
say
summer,
Fridays
why don't we just
is a
agree
challenge as
that
early
in
as
the summer,
possible.
maybe it's a different schedule? I mean, I have no,
Yeah, how about a different date?
yeah.
Or just mornings on the fourth Friday, so that perhaps the least conflicted. I just,
Early morning on the fourth Friday? Early morning on the
Everybody on
fourth
board?
Friday. Sorry?
Keep in
I'm
mind
just
with
saying, everybody on board with that?
I'm saying that.
that first fourth Friday is the beginning of
It's Memorial Day, I know. So we already have like a challenge, like if, even when we say, okay, the fourth Friday at 7 a.m., we can't do it the first fourth Friday because it's Memorial Day. So we will either have to go the third Friday or the fifth Friday in May. But,
If
sorry.
by chance some of us traveling, can we arrange to have call-in?
yes.
number?
yes, calling in more, I think we've also talked about, just for the purposes of really being able to gauge, trying to find locations where we can do video conferencing as well. And so I think if there are special circumstances, you know you're going to be somewhere where you couldn't do that, we go out of our way to find a location that would enable that here, whether it's at a, one of the businesses for one of these members or up at SU, wherever we need to go, we can make that happen.
Is there any business or organization in town that has a center that we could sort of count on? So that we always have that option?
Rock that. At the Tech
Is
Garden.
at the tech garden, we do.
But it's a question as to
I
whether
mean, honestly,
available.
call-in number is fine.
Yeah.
We all do that all the time in our businesses.
Almost anywhere we go, aside from here, it's going to have that availability, so.
I mean, video's nice, but.
Yep.
So, Mark, do you have what you need?
Well, we have a start.
Sounds like morning is better than the afternoon.
Morning on Friday is definitely preferable. I heard that. To 4 o'clock on
And we'll
Friday.
kind of work around the first or
And we'll
last
work
Friday of the
around
month,
first
based on
and the fourth.
holidays and those kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah.
So when would the first meeting be then, given the fourth Friday is Memorial Day?
I have to stop, sorry.
Friday before that, the 16th? May?
Or we do the first Friday in June is the other option.
You know, if we're gonna try and get this consultant on board on the contract,
I mean, I prefer we go earlier
Me too.
rather than later, just,
I would say the third.
you know, for the sense of keeping the consultants in. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work they can do maybe over the following 2 or 3 weeks. So we would look at May 16th, possible?
What time are you thinking of starting?
I'm sorry, Dan?
What time are you thinking of starting? I had to ask you to.
Maybe early, 7:30?
Hearing a lot of murmurs.
I know.
Hearing the voices.
Let's not take up everybody's time.
Right.
Yeah, and we'll just slosh through it as we have
And
to.
you all either show up or you won't.
And we've had somehow we've managed to find good ones, so it's worked so far.
Can we move to our last topic?
Yes, we can.
Jim?
I guess this is for the good of the order kind of questions. I mean, a couple things struck me today. One was that we have some issues with the state that all these communities deal with. And I don't know that we have made that part of our mission to address. But all these municipalities and agencies and directories and so forth operate in the environment of New York State. And there are things that the New York State government can do, not only to enable us, which they've already done, but to enable municipalities to, in this process, deal with some of their other problems. And I just wondered if that's too big of a bite. Welcome anybody's thoughts, we talked about pensions and so forth.
Yeah, I had a similar thought, just listening to the governor talk about everything that has been done to try to manage this. It strikes me that it would be nice if we could communicate the message of, and here are the things that can help facilitate these municipalities being able to actually operate. on their own effectively, manage their own budgets effectively, without having to reach out to the state for reasons that, oh, by the way, relate to these 4 or 5 mandates.
Steve, you can help advocate for the
Yeah.
respective communities, we should do that.
You know, these are observations, this is what we're hearing, what we heard today, I think is very exciting.
I think we can commend the government for taking the initiative. Listening to him today, talk about some of these things are unsustainable. And, the direction that he is taking and the cost of government going forward. And then conduct it to it in terms of what our needs or what will enable us to do our jobs here.
If I could just add to that, because when he mentioned sewer districts and lighting districts or any form of district, that's New York State law that defines sewers. I've got neighborhoods in the town of DeWitt I'd love to be able to put sewers in. I can't put sewers into those neighborhoods because it's cost prohibitive, because they're such a small area. The economies of scale say that the sewer's not practical, but the only financing mechanism I have for sewers is a special district. And so the rules are set up so that I can't serve those neighborhoods without help from like Congressman Walsh, who did that for us with James.
And a lot of those districts don't have any overhead costs. It's all part of normal day-to-day, so it's not when he talks about the light switches on every district, we not do it.
I don't want to dilute our mission, but we will glean information, and we've already heard things today, that are really significant burdens for local municipalities that somebody needs to deal with, even if we can just make a recommendation. I think we should do that somehow.
I think we should too. I think it is part of our mission. I mean, we're looking for all kinds of ways to modernize government, reduce the cost, improve the quality. And so I think we could keep a running tally of these things as they come up. Because over time being part of the pension calculation, let's just keep a list of those things we can make recommendations on. There's another area that I just want to throw out here. It's kind of a hot topic to a lightning rod issue, and that is, should we take any position or at least raise the issue of all of the tax-exempt institutions and how sustainable is a municipality when more than half of its tax base is tax exempt? And should these institutions be paying fee for services rendered? That's an issue I would like to see opened up, if not resolved, but at least explained.
I'll tell you a story. I was chairing the District of Columbia subcommittee on House Appropriations when Barry was the governor, or the mayor. And he came in, this is his second or third time he's been here. He came in and he said, "We're broke, we need money, we need help," and so on. And I said, why should we help you? He said, well, because most of my city is tax exempt. And I said, oh, you know what, Mayor? I said, I'll bet you that my hometown has a larger portion of tax exempt property than your hometown. And he took the bet, and I got Brookings or somebody to figure it out. And Syracuse had 1%, 1.5% less taxable property than Washington, D.C.
That's pretty tough.
So it's less than 50% of the city is taxable. So I hear you. I never paid off that bet. He was surprised, though. He was very surprised. But it does beg a point, and I don't know what the answer to that is. It's a big issue, and the mayor obviously is talking with tax exempt institutions. Now some are helping fully, some are not. So again, I don't want to dilute our mission too much. I don't know how big of a bite we can take here. How many enemies can we make?
I think it at least should be mentioned and explained.
Could we just look at those issues, as part of our mission, not necessarily draw a conclusion, but even with the unfunded mandates from the state, and it's a problem in the medical world, we've had so much pushback now towards our own state legislators about this, and we finally said enough is enough, and they're finally getting the message and saying, go back to all of these, stop these unfunded mandates, and I think this will be here, and it's great that these that is part of the problem. Even though we can't do anything about it ourselves, we can educate the public, and start pushing the public to make them aware of it, which then puts the pressure on the state legislature, which then hopefully may have some effect.
Does anybody think we shouldn't?
There's another benefit to this too, which I think holds back in what Melanie was talking about. Which is if you're able to identify some of these, there's almost always a story behind it. And it becomes a real touch point, I think, for people to start to understand the kinds of things we're looking at, the kind of work to do in this commission. It lends itself to public engagement. You not only send this letter, but maybe you really make this a point of conversation in the community. Frankly, you invite more, whether it's developing a special campaign that we follow on social media or even traditional media. I think it goes a long way. Identify a few areas. It goes a long way towards explaining what the work of this commission will do.
So one of the things I think it's worth, it's a key piece of the conversation on any issue with the community. I think one of the opportunities from doing it with all these stakeholders around the table, from towns, villages, city, county, is that I'm not sure how much you can really do about it, short of changing the tax code and taxing those institutions like churches and not-for-profits and higher ed healthcare. There are other ways to generate revenue through taxation that don't involve property tax. Property tax is not the most effective way of collecting revenue and or delivering services. The problem that I see is that you cannot change that taxation system for one jurisdiction within the county or the region without severely impacting people's location and behavior decisions. Right? We've been talking a number of times about a commuter tax for city residents. That would kill the city. Businesses, when residents who are employees who are faced with that tax, their employers would relocate out of the city. It would have the exact opposite effect. So as long as we're conscious of that, if we're talking about a prospective new model that can be applied on a much broader geographic area, I think that there's real value to that. I'm very sensitive, just personally, to the challenge of doing that on a small localized level.
Well, if we decided on one aspect of our report that could be, hurdles or challenges for municipalities, all municipalities, large and small, that would certainly be on the list, and depending on how we delivered that, how it was received, we could maybe use a lot.
The other part is too that you need to keep in mind that many of the issues that are brought up, aside from obviously the tax exemption issue, you wouldn't even know where to begin with that, but these issues, like something simple, I brought it up earlier, and you kind of, I think we leaned over it, but the lack of aligning schedules, right? Budgeting cycles, taxing cycles, the cycles of all these. As we begin to start to look at all these different, I'm speaking on behalf of Anne Marie, as we begin to look at all of these different municipalities, all these different districts, and all align on different schedules, you're going to find these types of issues. Well, we don't want to do it here because it affects us this way. And the same thing goes with impact bargaining. We begin to say, this unit's going to go here and that unit's going to go here. How do we reconcile these two issues? You're going to begin to see these issues that he's talking about firsthand, and these are going to be potentially hurdles that the commission is going to have to address. And so I would say yes, absolutely. Thinking in to the state, this is how you fix this for us to make this work for us. It's essential.
I think if we don't do, Jim, what you suggest, I think we lose some credibility. We can't solve it, but at least to acknowledge that these are some issues.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah. Any other questions or concerns that we haven't covered in the agenda?
Can we get a copy of the governor's speech today?
We can try. Yes.
And the speaker was very good today too. And I think there was a website where we can get a copy of his speech.
Yeah, we'll send out his presentation.
I mean, there's some pearls in there that may very well come down as we draft our elevator speech. Knowing that he's focused on this, it helps raise the.
Larry, you okay? Good. I want to thank you very, very much for being here. And we promise you that we've got a couple of things we're going to communicate with you over the next week. We need your input on the proposals. We're going to give you what we think are some important issues that we we focus on our interviews with each of them to look at proposals. So we'll get some of that stuff out to you for the next week. Thank you all very much.